This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South African President Ramaphosa hails arrival of the first doses of COVID-19 vaccine. As the debate on COVID-19 immunity continues, how can Africa trigger local manufacture of the vaccines? And in Egypt, coping with the coronavirus is a laughing matter. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at the stories coming up this hour. Egypt looks back at its economic transformation 10 years since historic unrest. In sports, Guinea sets their eyes on reaching the final but have neighbors and rivals Mali as their obstacle. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has hailed the arrival of the first doses of COVID-19 vaccine on Monday as a chance to turn the tide on a disease that has devastated the country. In total, the country has registered close to 1.5 million cases, the highest on the continent. Over 40,000 people have died, but 1.3 million have recovered from the virus. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa's first batch of COVID-19 vaccines from India touched down at Johannesburg's O.R. Tambo International Airport. President Cyril Ramaphosa was on hand to receive 1 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca jabs, designated for healthcare workers.
As a country, we've estimated 1.25 million of health workers, both for public and private sector, need to be prioritized.
We've lost a lot of healthcare workers. They were constantly in the firing line. And, all we could do is clap hands for them and basically continue to put them through a lot of trauma, mental health risks, and many of them have died. So this is the first tangible way to demonstrate that support.
It's been a long wait for frontline staff in the eye of the coronavirus storm for close to a year, but there's some anxiety around the vaccine.
I've got those mixed feelings because I need to know more about this vaccine, what it will do and what are the side effects, because it's a new vaccine. I, for one, am very scared. Every time when I come here, the only hope that I have is God, that I know He will protect me where He needs to protect, but it's scary.
The shots will undergo intense verification and quality checks over the next 14 days before a mass vaccination program kicks off. But ordinary South Africans, too, have mixed feelings.
I can't say that I trust it because I have never seen it working in South Africa. It's the first time it's coming, and we don't even know how it's going to react to people who are already have the virus. So we will see about it, and it will be wise and we'll be happy if it will help the people, because this virus is killing people.
I'm happy because the government is a step forward, understand? We waited so long. The government is showing us that it is doing something for us, understand? The health workers, frontline workers, have been deprived, they're exhausted. You see, they're working under terrible conditions. I think now they'll be relieved.
The South African government has been criticized for its slow response in acquiring vaccines, but the arrival of this first consignment brings hope that the country can finally turn the tide on this virus that has ravished the country. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt gave emergency approval on Sunday for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. A day earlier, the country received its first 50,000 doses of the AstraZeneca shot. Yasser Hakim brings us the latest on the vaccination campaign from Cairo.
The vaccines are rolling in. Egypt's approved AstraZeneca jab will be produced in India under the brand name Covishield. Egypt has ordered 20 million doses for 10 million people. Shipments of Russia's Sputnik V and China's Sinovac are going to follow in February.
Of course, there are challenges. Egypt should have received much more vaccines by now. But as you know, there is pressure on the producers from many countries, especially the developed states, that monopolizes the vaccines. This led to a reduction in the quantity sent to Egypt. The financial cost is another drawback. With the expensive vaccines and high quantities, they cost billions to purchase.
The first vaccine to be approved was China's Sinopharm and is now used to inoculate medical staff till mid-February. The second segment to be inoculated are the elderly and those with chronic diseases. Officials say the Sinopharm jabs will continue to be used even with the arrival of other types of vaccines.
The Sinopharm vaccine, or the Chinese vaccines in general, are the most suitable for Egypt. The storage temperatures are suitable, while Moderna and Pfizer need -70 degrees, and we don't have this technology in many countries.
With vaccine production slow worldwide, Egypt is also aiming to receive a license to manufacture jabs locally to ensure quicker supply and export to the rest of Africa. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa and Egypt will become the first African countries to administer the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, followed by Kenya. And the nations on the continent may also opt for this shot since it can be stored at normal refrigerator temperatures. But what do we know about the AstraZeneca vaccine? CGTN's Enoxi Collier takes a look.
It was hailed as a vaccine for the world, and Kenya has joined the queue of countries set to get the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine by mid-February. The vaccine is more affordable compared to other jabs manufactured by Western pharmaceutical companies. The East African country is expecting to roll out its vaccination program before the end of this month, free of charge for its citizens. But priority will be given to frontline workers and the most vulnerable. Kenya has reported over 1,700 deaths since the first case was detected in March last year. Hospitals and emergency services are currently dealing with a second wave of infections. There are concerns that infrastructure in Africa will not be able to support the distribution of vaccines that require ultra-cold temperatures like the Pfizer and Moderna shots. But the AstraZeneca jab can be stored and transported at normal fridge temperatures. Good news for poorer parts of the world. The vaccine was developed by the UK's Oxford University and pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca. Once given the jab, the patient's immune system starts to make antibodies, making it ready to attack any COVID-19 infections. During clinical trials, none of the participants receiving the actual vaccine developed severe COVID-19 or had to receive hospital treatment. Now, there is the question of whether the vaccine should be administered to people aged 60 years and above. Germany is set to limit AstraZeneca jab to those below 65 years of age. It says there is insufficient data over its efficacy for older people. But the UK scientists are sticking to their decision to have people aged above 65 years immunized as well. Enoxi Collier, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
As countries across the world push to get vaccines, questions have been raised about Africa's fate as the continent lacks capacity to produce its own. To discuss this, we're joined live via Skype by Bharat Pankania, a senior clinical lecturer at University of Exeter Medical School. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Vaccines have certainly become a hot debate even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Africa already had the highest numbers of deaths caused by infectious diseases, but still lacks capacity to produce vaccines. What are the main challenges?
We need the richer Western countries of United Kingdom, the European Union and the United States, and maybe elsewhere, China, etc., to support our brothers and sisters in the continent of Africa and enable. The important point is enable the African nations to set up plant and manufacture the vaccines under license and royalties. So we need the World Trade Organization, the United Nations organizations to bring together all these industries and set up plant in Africa, in several parts of Africa.
Now, given this crumble for the COVID-19 vaccines, How can Africa be self-sufficient, and how can the continent trigger the manufacture of the vaccines?
It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a very, very tall order. But having said that it's going to be a very tall order, we've got a problem and we've got to solve it. We just cannot ignore it. So what we do need is two things. One, for the richer nations to come to the aid of Africa. And number two, we need African leaders to play hardball and say, you will set up a plant in our country and enable us to manufacture the vaccine under license, under royalties, under favorable terms to immunize and protect our people. So have a look at the example of India. India has been manufacturing vaccine, but it has not kept the vaccines to itself. It has been donating it to South Africa and other countries. We also need to have the donations as well as set up plant to create and manufacture more vaccines.
All right, thank you very much for that. Bharat Bankania, live for us there in London. Now, the Africa CDC has formed a committee of experts to expedite its COVID-19 vaccine approval process. The committee includes national regulatory authorities from across the continent. Here's CGTN's Grum Chala with more.
Africa CDC has asked global vaccines manufacturers to send a detailed description of their products to its expert committee. Africa is already eyeing on at least 670 million doses of vaccines from multiple sources, and negotiations are pending for more. But vaccines approved elsewhere still undergo review in Africa. The African Union, mainly through its Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, approves candidate vaccines for member states to use. And that job will now be done by the AU's expert committee.
We are saying that vaccine manufacturers should share their dossiers with us as soon as possible so that the process is not delayed. So, say, for example, AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Moderna, if they were to export vaccines to the continent, you send us your dossier. This expert committee will review that. And it's an expert committee that includes national regulatory authorities across the continent and outside the continent. They'll review those and then provide their expert opinion on it. I think that is a process.
Most African nations are yet to receive their first batch of vaccines. Africa CDC advised AU member states to start planning for manufacturing COVID-19 related medical supplies locally to combat the virus.
In the post-COVID reconstruction of Africa, in the area of public health, we have to emphasize the ability to produce these interventions locally. That is the oxygen, the vaccines, the drugs, and the diagnostic. But they are not there. We are building it and using it as to fight the pandemic as we go forward.
The continent's health body plans to vaccinate at least 60% of the population to create herd immunity as soon as possible. Still, many fear Africa may fall far behind in the race to secure vaccines. Grumtala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Zimbabwe's government has mobilized $100 million for COVID-19 vaccines. The country's finance ministry said it will procure 10 million doses, which will inoculate 60% of the country's population. Farai Mokutuya has more on that.
A Treasury official said a 2020 budget surplus and some 2021 tax revenues will be redirected to pay for the vaccine doses. While welcoming the news, frontline workers are worried that the country's response may fail to keep pace with the rampaging pandemic.
We can actually say we are now behind because by now we expect to start noticing results from those countries that actually started the vaccination process. So if we have not started now and we expect at least 6 weeks to notice effects of the vaccine, the results, the good results of the vaccine, then it means we are still far from over.
Authorities are waiting on expert advice to guide the next course of action.
this government is preparing as hard as it can. We have, as I indicated before, meticulously looking at our situation, our environment. We did some assessments, October, November, to see where we are, to identify the gaps and begin to plug those gaps. And that's exactly what we're doing with our technical teams and so on. We've put in a strategic framework that really guides us, that looks at, how do we prioritize, how do we resource mobilize, how do we do advocacy, communicate with the communities and so on. So all that we are continuing to work.
The government is keeping all options on the table, which means it has not chosen just one vaccine to go with. It says it's taken the strategic decision because of the virulence of the second wave of COVID-19, which compels it not to keep all its eggs in one basket. It's not clear when the vaccine purchase is expected. Medical experts have recommended ample training for those who will be administering them.
How it is done, how it is transported, if it needs cold chain management, where we need to maintain it frozen, then we have to make sure that we have enough refrigeration, we have to make sure we have enough supply, we have to make sure we have generators in the rural areas.
Apart from the national purse, Zimbabwe can also call on funds pledged by the business community to help procure vaccines. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The United Kingdom has slapped sanctions on 4 Zimbabwean security officials over alleged human rights abuses. These sanctions are on Minister for State Security Owen Nsube, as well as heads of police and intelligence organizations. The individuals under the new restrictions cannot freely travel to the UK or conduct transactions through UK banks. The UK is citing a crackdown on protests in January 2019 that left 17 people dead, as well as post-election violence in 2018. In reaction to the news, Zimbabwe's government spokesman said none of these sanctioned officials have assets in the United Kingdom, nor have they shown interest in traveling there in the past 3 years. While you're watching Africa Live, we're taking a short break. Coming up, Myanmar's military has released some regional and state chief ministers from detention a day after the government takeover.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Athens, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Myanmar remained outwardly calm on Tuesday, a day after the military seized power in a coup ahead of the reopening of a newly elected parliament. Here's a glimpse of the situation on the ground in both Yangon and Naypyidaw. The streets were quieter than usual, but markets were open and public transportation like taxis and buses were still running. There were also few obvious signs of heavy security. A senior military official told China's Xinhua news agency that most regional and state chief ministers that that were detained have been released. Aung San Suu Kyi and other prominent figures, however, are still under arrest. The country's top army general is now in control and has issued a one-year state of emergency after Monday's takeover. Meanwhile, the U.S. President Joe Biden is threatening to impose sanctions on Myanmar. He condemned the military's takeover and its arrest of Aung San Suu Kyi, calling it a direct assault on the country's democracy and rule of law. Biden is now considering restoring U.S. sanctions that were lifted over the past decade as the country moved towards democracy. The U.S. president also urged the international community to work together to pressure the military to relinquish the power it seized. Myanmar's military takeover shocked many of its neighbors, including Thailand, where hundreds of protesters faced off with riot police outside Myanmar's embassy in Bangkok. Our correspondent Dusita Saiko reports.
In neighboring Thailand, where more than 4 million people from Myanmar reside, news spread quickly. Concern, frustration, sadness, they gathered at their embassy.
I feel so sad. I cried when I heard the news. If the borders were open, I would go back to Myanmar right now. But it's closed because of COVID-19. So I came here to the embassy instead to support my country.
Moments later, the police line up, ready to disperse the crowd. Protesters fight back. A violent clash ensues. Objects thrown, smoke bombs explode. And confusion follows. Hundreds of activists and supporters of the NLD gathered outside the Myanmar embassy here in Bangkok, where things took a turn for the worse. As you can see behind me, police forces trying to push back the crowd to disperse the protesters. The protesters were seen to be throwing some type of projectile objects. We had a few explosions here, but right now it seems that the situation has calmed down as well. So it seems whatever happened in Myanmar is having an effect in neighboring Thailand. Lucita Saokao, CGTN, Thailand.
More than 20 members of the former ruling party in Ethiopia's Tigray region are due to appear in court again in the capital Addis Ababa. They include a founding member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. They were arrested in January after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared victory over the party after nearly a month of fighting in Tigray, but the individuals have not yet been charged. Here's CGTN's Grim Chala with more.
Ethiopia's security forces have been working to arrest dozens of people who were members of the TPLF or affiliated with it. Already apprehended are 20 of the party's top leadership and members of its central committee.
96 key TPLF leaders, which come from the Central Committee of the party, as well as the executive, have been conspiring against the constitutional order and were organizing terrorist activities by training forces for this purpose. So we have court warrants on these 96 TPLF leaders, but the total number of suspected criminals is 349. In this number, we have retired and active federal army and police members too.
A founding member of TPLF, Subhat Negga, and others will be appearing in court for the third time. They face charges as serious as treason. The Ethiopian Attorney General promises fair trial.
Those criminals who are under investigation and are appearing in court will be fairly tried. We shall respect their rights. We have already pressed charges against most of them based on their respective criminal acts. Again, they will face justice in a free court, with the government fully recognizing Tigrayan rights to legally defend themselves.
The Ethiopian National Defense Force alongside the federal police have been chasing suspects since January. The mission of apprehending the former regional president Debretsion Gebremikhail is also ongoing.
So far, we have apprehended 124 suspects and they're appearing in court. And this process was a clear testimony of the rule of law in this country. In general, we have compiled more than 600 eyewitnesses and undoubted document testimonies against these people.
Since the completion of what the government named a law enforcement mission in Tigray, another important issue is the humanitarian situation. Tens of thousands have fled the region, and millions who stayed behind are in need of relief services. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
South Sudan's government says it has approved the establishment of a hybrid court to try suspects of war crimes committed during the 6 years of civil war in the country. The 2018 peace agreement demands that a hybrid court be formed in South Sudan to try and get justice for victims of violence. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says it will now begin setting up the hybrid court. The 2018 peace deal dictates that a court be established in Juba comprising judges from South Sudan and selected African countries to try suspects of war crimes in the country. The peace accord also requires the transitional government to establish a reparation commission. The commission is expected to compensate those who lost property between 2013 to 2018 as a result of the civil war in South Sudan. The war was between the government and opposition group led by the current Vice President Riek Machar. One of the priorities of the new government is to promote peace and reconciliation. Juba is expected to form a number of commissions to try and provide justice for victims.
Minister of Justice was asking for an authorization, and the cabinet approved the presentation and authorized him to start the process of the establishment of all these institutions in accordance with the provisions of the agreement.
The 2018 peace deal says the African Union will supervise the establishment of a hybrid court in Juba. The AU says it welcomes the approval to set up a hybrid court by South Sudan's government. The UN says nearly 400,000 people have died in the 6 years of conflict, and that 4 million South Sudanese people were forced to flee their homes. Some have become refugees, while others are internally displaced, many of whom say they hope the establishment of the hybrid court will bring justice in the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
In other news, officials from the United Nations are calling for long-term solutions in Somalia's Baidoa city in regards to internally displaced persons. Thousands of people have been affected by floods and drought that have caused them to flee to camps like Khartoum. For more on this, we're joined by Ahmed Abubakar Ahmed, Director General, Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, the federal government of Somalia. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Could you kindly paint us a picture of the IDP challenge in Somalia?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the team of the TV. As you know, due to the disasters in Somalia, either man-made disasters like civil war and conflict, or natural disasters like drought and floods, around 2 million Somali people are internally displaced in around 2,000 IDP sites, which is self-settled IDPs in different areas in the country, including urban areas and urban areas. And according to the detailed site assessment that made by Camp Coordination and Camp Management Cluster, 74% of these camps are not in government buildings, but they are private buildings. So, and these people are living in very poor living conditions, and they have lacking all basic needs, including food, nutrition, water, and sanitation. So many these people, they is not going back to their homes because they lost their livelihood activities, and they are independent to the humanitarian services. So many UN agencies and NGOs, also some Arab and Muslim countries agencies, are helping these people to deliver some limited humanitarian services. And because of limited access of this humanitarian service, many people, they now prone to female or very poor health and nutrition conditions. So Somali government trying its best to help these people go back to their origins and restart their livelihood, income generation opportunities. So most of these people are pastoralists or agro-pastoralists, so they were the basics for the national economy. But due to this disasters and given to the conflicts in the country, they urged to displace from these far areas to the urban areas just to get daily life or some small assistance from humanitarian community in here.
If I may just jump in, sir, what are the likely solutions to the problems these people are facing?
Yes, to enable these people to have a resilient livelihood is the most important step to solve this displacement, and to help with them financially, to support them create their own income generations, or to help with them have sustainable livelihood situations like microfinancing projects, or doing some restocking for the pastoralists, also to help with the small-scale farmers to get back to farming, like giving them tools and irrigation and seeds that will help also to train the youth people in these IDP camps for some vocational trainings to help with them have their own or self-owned businesses, or their own some employment techniques will be solutions for these displaced people.
All right, thank you very much for your time. Ahmed Abubakar Ahmed joining us live from Mogadishu. You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news. Egypt looks back at its economic transformation 10 years since historic unrest. And China's top diplomat calls for better ties with the U.S. as the Biden administration takes office.
It's taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Egyptians are marking the 10th anniversary since the 2011 uprising which toppled former President Hosni Mubarak. CGTN's Yasser Kim examines Egypt's economic transformation since the overthrow of the former regime.
It's been a volatile decade for the North African state. The January 2011 uprising was followed by a few years of instability and continuous demonstrations before the establishment of the current regime.
This period has been witnessed by complete destabilization. The economy has been affected seriously regarding foreign direct investment, regarding tourism, and these are very important sources of foreign exchanges for Egypt that had been affected seriously. And due to that, the economic situation was regarding the GDP growth, it has been decreasing to 1.9%, which is the worst for Egypt during this period. Unemployment has increased, inflation started to rise significantly. So all economic indicators in this period was bad.
A transition period ended in 2014 with the ouster of the now outlawed Muslim Brotherhood from power and the election of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as president. He immediately embarked on a rebuilding process.
When President El-Sisi took responsibility, he started to establish mega projects in order to reach Sinai, in order to reach Upper Egypt by, connecting all geographic areas of Egypt with infrastructure. The program of economic reforms that President El-Sisi started in 2017, actually, with supervision of the IMF, was to liberalize the economy, to attract investment, and to enhance the possibility of exploiting our resources.
The 5-year economic reforms have been hailed by international financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. But there were challenges such as the war on terrorism.
Terrorism in any country has huge negative effects on the economy. Tourism, a main source of hard currency, saw a drop from $13 billion to $4 billion. This impacted the Egyptian pound and the availability of foreign currencies. This was compounded by the downing of a Russian passenger plane by terrorists. Unfortunately, terrorism back then kept foreign investors away and FDIs dropped significantly.
There has been a major improvement since then, with increased security reflecting positively on the economy and living conditions. However, 2020 saw another major challenge, following the outbreak of the coronavirus that hit economies worldwide. But Egypt has managed to weather the storm better than most countries.
One advantage is that there was no shortage in supply of goods and products in the markets in spite of the coronavirus pandemic. The Egyptian government managed to balance between two contradictions, a lockdown and keeping the economy operating. There was a curfew, but many businesses were allowed to remain open. This balance succeeded in containing the virus and at the same time maintained positive growth numbers.
After successfully navigating the dicey period since the 2011 uprising, Egypt hopes the next 10 years would be of stability and development. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
To China-U.S. relations now, and Yang Jiechi, director of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee and China's former ambassador to the United States, has called for a restoration of a constructive relationship between Washington and Beijing. CGTN's Dai Kai reports.
As the new U.S. administration moved into the White House nearly 2 weeks ago, China's top diplomat says the relationship between China and the U.S. stands at a defining moment.
China and the United States are the world's two largest economies, as well as prominent members of the UN Security Council. Effective cooperation between the two has a direct bearing on the well-being of all people, as well as peace, development, and global prosperity.
Yan said for the past few years, the Trump administration adopted misguided policies against China, plunging the relationship into its most difficult period since the establishment of the diplomatic ties. He added attempts from the U.S. side seeking decoupling and a potential Cold War have seriously damaged China-U.S. ties and fundamental interests. At this critical juncture, Yan said it's time for the two countries' relationship to get on a more predictable and constructive track.
China is prepared to work with the United States to move the relationship forward along the track of no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation for the well-being of both countries and peoples.
Yan said opening up has been the key driving force behind China's rapid development, and the country will remain fully committed to that fundamental policy. In the meantime, he also pointed out that China will continue to stand firm to defend its sovereignty, security, and development interests. Dakai CGTN, Beijing.
Continued uncertainty in Japan over the fate of this summer's Olympics is weighing heavy on the country's economy. Experts say it's placed added pressure on businesses after a disruptive year. CGTN's Grace Lee has more.
Well, many of these businesses have been preparing for the upcoming Olympic Games for the past few years. And even with the postponement, they've kept their hopes high and have continued on with their plans, especially with the International Olympics Committee and the Japanese government both saying that there is no plan B and that the Olympics will go ahead as scheduled in July. But businesses have been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic, and there are fears that this second state of emergency will mean further losses. The recovery that had been forecasted for 2021 remains very fragile. There are still many uncertainties surrounding the Olympics as well. One of the biggest questions being, will there be international spectators? Without them, Japan will be taking a $23 billion hit. We spoke with a tourism association based out of Nikko, just north of Tokyo, who gave us a very grim outlook of what's been happening there.
We have over 700 members for our association. Most of them are hotels and Japanese traditional inns. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many of them had no choice but to shut down. Currently, for the weekdays, almost 70 to 80% of the hotels are closed. Once safety is ensured, we want customers to come and visit us and for the Olympics to be held. But for that to happen, the pandemic needs to be under control for Japan and the rest of the world. We were originally expecting a lot of visitors with the Olympics, but with the current situation, safety comes first.
Well, we did see in a recent poll by NHK, Japan's national broadcaster, that about 60% of the companies that they surveyed are hoping that the Olympics will be held as scheduled. Now, that's in comparison to about 80% of the general public that showed in several polls recently that they don't want the Olympics to go ahead as planned. That stark difference does tell us that most Japanese companies are hoping that the Olympics will be able to deliver some much-needed relief to Japan's economy in 2021.
At this year's virtual Davos agenda, climate change was near the top of the agenda. One way to reduce carbon emissions is planting trees, but there is concern among scientists that it's not being done right and that can harm the environment. Jemima Walker takes a look.
Trees are one of nature's great solutions to a man-made problem. But it's not as simple as digging a hole and hoping for the best. That's why scientists have come up with 10 golden rules for tree planting. A beech like this takes seconds to chop down but years to grow. That's why rule number 1 is protect existing forests first. Old trees are better at soaking up carbon and they're more resilient. The next rule is involve local communities in tree planting initiatives. They're the ones who are most likely to benefit, so they'll also be most likely to be invested in making sure seeds take root. And make sure biodiversity is maximised. Scientists here at Kew say this is a crucial decade for tree planting.
Well, everyone knows that there's a huge crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss at the moment. And I think tree planting is widely seen as an answer to all these problems. And as a result, there are a huge number of global initiatives to plant trees across the world. And in fact, one of them aims to reforest an area that is larger than the size of India. So it's really important we get it right.
Can planting trees really stop climate change?
Planting trees can certainly go a long way towards capturing carbon, thus reducing the carbon in the atmosphere, and that will help with the global greenhouse effect. But it's not the only answer, and it can't solve the problem on its own. So tree planting must be accompanied with massive reductions in global carbon emissions, and without that we're not going to get on top of the climate problem.
There are some bold tree planting initiatives all around the world. China plans to plant 35 million hectares of trees in the north of the country by 2050. Banks and nations recently pledged more than $14 billion to accelerate a Great Green Wall across Africa. But the reality is deforestation is happening at pace. Forests are often called the lungs of the earth, and scientists say we need to do more to keep them breathing. Jemima Walker, CGTN in Kew, London.
You're watching Africa Live. We're taking a short break, but we've got plenty coming up, including this. In Egypt, coping with the coronavirus is a laughing matter.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, it hasn't been all doom and gloom amid the coronavirus pandemic. One wellness coach has a unique way of killing this stress through laughter, and Egyptians are taking it up and laughing their troubles away.
These Cairo residents are gathered here for yet another session of yoga, but it is a different one.
Arms.
Their German wellness coach, Jutta Devika, shows them how to sit back and, well, laugh.
The first day I came to the coaching academy in London, a woman sat next to me and said, "You look exactly like my sister." And I said, "Wow, what did your sister do?" And she said, "My sister is a happiness facilitator." And I was like, these two words really made it like happiness facilitator. How good is that? How do you facilitate happiness? And she told me she does laughter yoga.
As the coronavirus pandemic continues to present many with tough choices in life, Devika is teaching her clients the value of hope.
Laughter yoga is the best way to address the problems that we have now collectively all over the world. There is a lot of depression, there is a lot of anxiety, and people feel so super stressed. Laughter changes the biochemistry within minutes. We are swamped with endorphins and serotonin and happy maker hormones, and it changes our body and our well-being in 3 minutes. So laughter is the solution to the problems we have right now.
While many usually draw their laughter from humorous situations or talk, these residents are learning the art of laughing for no reason and at nothing in particular.
I honestly really enjoyed my day. Today, I realized that laughter without a cause doesn't have to be inappropriate. Laughter in this way really brings the human senses to life. This was the first time I realized that we laugh from our stomachs, we laugh from our hearts, we laugh from our fingertips, we laugh from our legs, and we laugh at ourselves.
The attendees use different laughing exercises, such as pretending to laugh at a joke on the phone, or dancing, clapping, as well as chanting rhymes. Some just laugh at their colleagues who are struggling to generate their laughter.
I love strange things. I like to try anything that is new, but I don't find this strange. I don't feel strange doing it. On the contrary, it brings people back to their nature, which is childhood and innocence. Today, we are exactly like children.
As they generate their happiness, it is clear that not even coronavirus can withstand the power of laughter. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
And coming up in sports, Guinea sets their eyes on reaching the final but have neighbours and rivals Mali as their obstacle.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We begin with African football news. The semi-finals of the African Nations Championship will kick off on Wednesday when Mali take on neighbours Guinea at the Japoma Stadium in Douala. Guinea's players looked in great spirits as they took part in one of their final training sessions on Monday. The clash between the two neighbouring countries is already making headlines in Conakry and Bamako. Guinea secured their place in the semi-finals of the African Nations Championship in Cameroon on Sunday after defeating Rwanda 1-0 in a match which saw both sides finish with 10 men at the Limbe Stadium. The other semi-final will see hosts Cameroon take on defending champions Morocco.
We will take into account the different knowledge we have between the two teams. The temperament we have will then work on the mental level because the match between Mali and Guinea is played on the mental level. Then we will have